I never thought I would become the person my entire family called selfish after my father died. For 28 years, I was the son who handled things quietly. I paid my own bills, stayed out of family arguments, and whenever my parents needed help, I was usually the one who showed up. My older brother, Marcus, lived 3 states away and visited maybe 4 or 5 times a year. So when Dad died, I expected grief. I didn't expect a family war over a house. The house wasn't some huge mansion. It was a weathered 2-story home at the edge of a small town, with peeling white paint, a crooked porch, and a backyard my father had spent years turning into a garden. To most people, it probably wasn't worth much. To us, it was everything. My parents had lived there for 37 years. I had grown up there. My brother had gotten married there. My mother had spent her final years there after her health started declining. And after Mom passed away, Dad refused to leave. He always said, "Your mother and I built our life in these walls. I don't want to spend my last years pretending another place is home." Dad died peacefully one Tuesday morning. 3 days later, Marcus came into town. We were sitting around the kitchen table with coffee nobody was drinking when he finally said, "So, what are we doing with the house?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He sighed like I was being difficult. "The house. Obviously, we're going to sell it." I remember staring at him because, at the time, I genuinely thought he was joking. "Why would we sell it?" "Because neither of us is living here." "I am." He stopped. "You?" "Yeah. I thought you were renting your apartment." "I was. I moved back here 6 months ago to help Dad." Marcus looked toward the hallway. "You moved in without telling me?" "I told you. You texted me once. You didn't answer." He rubbed his forehead. "Look, that's not the point. Dad's gone. We need to be practical." I didn't argue. Not yet. The funeral was the next morning. Afterward, while everyone was still gathered at the house, Marcus started talking about real estate agents. He had already apparently looked up the estimated value. He told our aunt the property could sell for a decent amount. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad had been dead for less than 24 hours. And my brother was already dividing the money in his head. That evening, after everyone left, Marcus came into the kitchen. "We should talk." "About the house?" "Yes. I already told you. I'm staying." He leaned against the counter. "You can't just decide that. I live here. That doesn't mean it's yours." "I never said it was." "Then what are you saying?" I took a breath. "I'm saying I'm not selling it." Marcus stared at me. Then he laughed. Not because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh people use when they think you're being ridiculous. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Dad wanted me to keep it." His expression changed. "What?" I didn't answer immediately. There was something I hadn't told him. Something Dad had told me 6 months before he died. And I had promised my father I wouldn't tell anyone until after he was gone. I hadn't expected that promise to put me directly against my brother. But that night, I realized something even stranger. Marcus wasn't surprised that Dad might have wanted me to keep the house. He looked scared. And I had no idea why. Marcus stood completely still after I told him Dad wanted me to keep the house. Then he asked, very quietly, "What exactly did Dad say?" I remembered the conversation immediately. It had happened 6 months earlier, on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Dad had been sitting at the kitchen table with an old envelope in front of him. He looked tired that day. Not sick exactly. Just tired in a way I hadn't seen before. He pushed the envelope toward me. "Keep this somewhere safe." I picked it up. "What's inside?" "Something you'll understand later." I smiled. "That's not an answer." He didn't smile back. Then he said something that confused me. "If Marcus asks you about the house, don't tell him anything until after I'm gone." I remember thinking that maybe Dad was worried about his will. So I asked, "Is Marcus supposed to get the house?" Dad shook his head. "No." "Then who?" He looked at me for several seconds. "You." I actually laughed. "I don't need the house. This isn't about what you need." "Then what's it about?" Dad looked toward the window. "It's about what your mother wanted." That sentence stayed with me. I had no idea what Mom had wanted. She had been gone for almost 3 years. Whenever I asked Dad about her final days, he usually changed the subject. Now, standing in the kitchen with Marcus staring at me, I wished I'd asked more questions. Instead, I simply said, "Dad left instructions." Marcus's face tightened. "What instructions?" "I can't tell you yet." "Why?" "Because I promised him." He slammed his palm against the counter. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'm not." "So Dad made some secret agreement with you behind my back?" "I don't know if I'd call it an agreement." "What would you call it?" "I'd call it something he wanted me to respect." Marcus stared at me. Then he said something I'll never forget. Dad knew I needed that money. I frowned. What does that have to do with anything? He looked away. Nothing. But it clearly had something to do with everything. The next morning, we went to Dad's lawyer together. His name was Harold Bennett. He had handled my parents' legal affairs for more than 20 years. Marcus arrived early. I could tell because when I walked in, he was already sitting across from Harold's desk. There were several folders in front of him. Harold looked at me and nodded. Come in. We were just discussing your father's estate. Marcus didn't say anything. I sat down. Harold opened a folder. Your father left a fairly straightforward will. Marcus leaned forward. Who gets the house? Harold looked at him. Then at me. The house is not being divided between you. Marcus's jaw tightened. Who gets it? Harold turned one page. Your brother. Silence. I expected Marcus to explode. Instead, he became strangely calm. That's impossible. Harold frowned. Why? Because Dad told me something completely different. My stomach dropped. What did Dad tell you? Marcus looked directly at me. He told me the house would be mine. Harold stopped turning the pages. For the first time, he looked genuinely confused. Your father never told me that. Marcus leaned back. Well, he told me. I looked at Harold. Did Dad leave anything else? Harold hesitated. Then he closed the folder. There is one additional document. Marcus immediately sat forward. What document? Harold looked at me. Your father specifically instructed me not to open it until both sons were present. My heart started beating faster. Harold reached into a locked drawer. He pulled out a thin brown envelope. There was no address. No explanation. Just one handwritten sentence on the front. I recognized Dad's handwriting immediately. For my sons, but especially the one who thinks he knows why I wrote this. Marcus read it twice. Then he looked at me. And for the first time since Dad died, I saw fear in my brother's eyes. Harold placed the envelope on the desk between us. Neither of us touched it. For several seconds, the only sound in the office was the rain tapping against the window. Finally, Marcus said, "Open it." Harold looked at me. I nodded. He carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Harold read it silently first. Then his expression changed. What? I asked. He handed the paper to me. I read the first line. If you are reading this, then I am no longer here to explain myself. I swallowed. The rest was addressed to both of us. Dad wrote that the house was not simply property. It was something he had promised Mom he would protect. That sentence confused me. Then I reached the part that made my hands go cold. Your mother asked me to keep one thing from both of you until the right time. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the paper. What thing? He asked. I continued reading. Dad explained that shortly before Mom died, she discovered something about the house. Something involving the previous owner. Apparently, before my parents bought it, the property had belonged to an elderly couple. The husband had died first. The wife later moved away. But before she left, she supposedly made an unusual request. She asked the new owners to preserve one particular room exactly as it was. My father agreed. I looked up. There's more. Dad had written that the small room at the back of the upstairs hallway had never been renovated. He called it the Blue Room. I immediately knew which room he meant. It had always been locked. When I was a child, I assumed it was because Dad stored old furniture there. But he had never let either of us enter. Marcus suddenly said, "That's ridiculous." Harold looked at him. Why? Because Dad said there was nothing in there. I turned toward him. You knew about the room? Marcus didn't answer. That was when I realized something. He knew more than he was saying. I asked again. How do you know what Dad said was in that room? Marcus rubbed his face. Because I asked him about it years ago. What did he tell you? Nothing. Then why are you acting like you know what's inside? He stood up. I'm not. Harold calmly said, "Please sit down." Marcus sat. I kept reading. Dad's letter said that Mom had discovered an old photograph hidden behind the wall inside the Blue Room. The photograph showed the original owners standing in front of the house. But there was someone else in the picture. A young boy. Dad wrote that Mom had spent months trying to discover who the boy was. Then, just before she died, she finally found out. I stopped reading. Marcus whispered, "Who?" I looked at the page. The answer was written in Dad's handwriting. The boy in the photograph was not the owner's son. I looked at Marcus. He was pale. Harold leaned forward. Keep reading. The next paragraph was even stranger. Dad wrote that the boy had been connected to the house for decades. He had been mentioned in old records. And Mom had discovered that the boy's name appeared again years later in a completely different document. A document connected to our family. I felt a chill run through me. What document? I read the final lines. The truth is in the blue room. But before you open it, understand this. One of my sons has already been inside. I looked at Marcus. He didn't move. Harold asked quietly, have you? Marcus stared at the floor. Then he finally said, yes. Marcus finally admitted he had been inside the blue room. I couldn't even speak for a few seconds. Harold looked at him and asked, when? Marcus avoided my eyes. About 2 years ago. Why? I asked. He rubbed his hands together. Because Dad was acting strange. That's not an answer. I thought he was hiding money. I almost laughed. You broke into a locked room because you thought Dad had money hidden there? I didn't break in. Then how did you get inside? Marcus hesitated. Dad gave me the key. That changed everything. I looked at Harold. Did Dad give him permission? Harold shook his head. Your father never mentioned this to me. Marcus leaned forward. I only looked around for a few minutes. There was nothing. What did you see? Old boxes. Furniture. Some papers. Photographs. He paused. Maybe. I don't remember. I knew he was lying. The problem was, I didn't know what he was trying to hide. Harold unfolded Dad's letter again. There is another page. My heart sank. He pulled a second sheet from the envelope. Dad had written another message. This one was addressed only to me. If Marcus tells you he found nothing, don't believe him. I looked up. Marcus's face had gone completely blank. Harold continued reading. Dad said that Mom had discovered the truth about the boy in the photograph shortly before she died. But she hadn't told him everything. She had left him a note. And Dad had hidden that note somewhere inside the house. He wrote that the note explained why the blue room had remained untouched for so many years. Then came the sentence that made my stomach drop. Your brother knows where it is. I turned toward Marcus. Where is Mom's note? He didn't answer. Marcus. He stood up. I'm leaving. Harold immediately said, sit down. Marcus ignored him. I stepped in front of the door. You're not leaving until you tell me. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger. Not jealousy. Fear. Then he said something that completely changed the situation. I didn't come here for the money. I stared at him. Then why did you come? He lowered his voice. Because Dad called me 3 weeks before he died. I felt my chest tighten. What did he say? Marcus looked toward Harold. Then back at me. He said he knew what I'd done. What did you do? Marcus swallowed. I took something from the blue room. The office went silent. Harold asked, what did you take? Marcus reached into his jacket. For a moment, I thought he was going to pull out a document. Instead, he placed a small brass key on the desk. I'd seen that key before. It belonged to the blue room. Marcus looked at me. There's something behind the wall. Then he whispered. And Dad wasn't the first person who tried to hide it. I stared at the brass key sitting on Harold's desk. You said you took something from the room. Marcus nodded. What? I don't have it anymore. Then where's it? He looked at me. With someone else. That answer made absolutely no sense. Harold asked who. Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he looked at the letter again. I never understood why Dad kept that room locked. When I found the key 2 years ago, I thought he was hiding something valuable. And you searched it? Yes. What did you find? An old wooden box behind a cabinet. My stomach tightened. What was inside? Photographs. Letters. A newspaper clipping. Harold leaned forward. And you took them? Only one thing. What? Marcus looked down. A photograph. I remembered Dad's letter. The photograph of the elderly couple and the mysterious boy. You took the photograph? Marcus nodded. Why? Because the boy looked familiar. I frowned. Familiar how? Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out his phone. He opened a photograph. It was an old picture of our mother when she was young. Then he placed it beside another picture on his phone. My heart stopped. The 2 photographs were almost identical. Our mother was standing beside a man I didn't recognize. And the man was the same boy from the old photograph. Only older. I looked at Marcus. Who is that? I don't know. Then why did you take the picture? Because I found his name on the back. What name? Marcus hesitated. Then he said it. Daniel Mercer. The name meant nothing to me. But Harold suddenly became very still. I noticed it immediately. You know that name? He didn't answer. Harold? He slowly stood up and walked toward a filing cabinet. After searching through several folders, he pulled out a thin file. He placed it on the desk. There was an old handwritten label on it. Mercer Property, 1989. I looked at him. What does this have to do with our family? Harold opened the file. Inside was a copy of the original property agreement for our house. But there was something else attached. A letter from our mother, dated 4 months before she died. I read the first few lines. My hands started shaking. Mom had written that she had finally discovered who Daniel Mercer was, and she had discovered why he had been connected to our house. But the final paragraph was the part that terrified me. If my husband ever finds out what I discovered, he will never forgive me. I looked at Harold. Why would Mom write that? He didn't answer. Marcus suddenly spoke. Because Daniel wasn't a stranger. I turned toward him. How do you know? Marcus looked at me. Because I found another photograph. He took out his phone again. This time, the photograph showed Daniel Mercer standing beside my mother. But they weren't standing like strangers. They looked like family. And written on the back were 6 words. He was your mother's first son. I couldn't breathe. Marcus whispered. That means we have a brother. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I kept staring at the photograph. A brother. A son my mother had supposedly never mentioned. A person who had somehow been connected to the house before my parents even bought it. I looked at Marcus. You're telling me Mom had another son? I think so. Because I never found a birth certificate. Harold took the photograph from my hand. He studied it carefully. Then he opened the old property file again. There is something you both need to understand. He pulled out another document. It was a handwritten statement from our mother. She explained that when she was 17, she had become pregnant. Her parents had pressured her into giving the baby up for adoption. She had been told she would never see him again. His name was Daniel. But years later, she discovered that Daniel had somehow ended up living with the elderly couple who owned the house. That's how he appeared in the old photograph. My mother had eventually tracked him down. But she never told my father. I felt angry. Why? Harold looked at me. Because your father wasn't Daniel's biological father. Marcus stared at the floor. So Dad knew. Harold nodded slowly. Eventually. I couldn't understand. Then why didn't Dad tell us? Harold looked at the letter. Because your mother made him promise. Promise what? That he would never reveal Daniel's identity unless Daniel came looking for the family himself. I sat back. Everything suddenly felt much bigger than a house. Then I remembered Dad's letter. The house. Harold nodded. Your mother believed Daniel had a legal connection to it. What kind of connection? Harold turned another page. The elderly couple left something in their original agreement. He pointed to a paragraph. If Daniel ever returned to claim the property, he was entitled to a portion of it. I looked at Marcus. Then why did Dad leave the house to me? Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out the final document. It was a recent letter. Dad had written it only 2 months before he died. He explained that Daniel had contacted him. He had found our family. But he didn't want money. He wanted answers. Dad had invited him to the house. They had met privately. And Dad had learned something that completely changed his understanding of the past. Daniel wasn't interested in claiming the house. He wanted to know why his mother had abandoned him. Dad promised to help him find the truth. Then came the final paragraph. My sons, the house belongs to neither of you in the way you think. I am leaving it to you because Daniel asked me to. I looked up. What? Harold nodded. There is more. Dad had apparently decided that the house should remain in the family. But not for Marcus. Not even specifically for me. He wanted me to keep it temporarily until Daniel was ready to return. Marcus suddenly stood. Where is he? Harold looked at him. Who? Silence. Then Harold said. He's already been to the house. My blood ran cold. When? 3 weeks ago. I looked at Marcus. He looked just as shocked as I was. Harold continued. He met your father privately. Where? The blue room. I remembered Marcus saying he had taken something from that room. Then I realized something. Dad hadn't been hiding the truth from us. He had been waiting for the right person to come back. I looked at Marcus. Where is Daniel now? Marcus slowly pulled another folded piece of paper from his jacket. I found this inside the photograph frame. He handed it to me. There was only one sentence. If you want to know why your mother gave me away, ask your brother what he found in the blue room. I looked at Marcus. This time, he didn't deny anything. He simply said, I know why. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You know why Mom gave Daniel away? Marcus nodded. Then tell me. He sat down slowly. I found a letter. From Mom? No. From Grandma. That surprised me. What did it say? Marcus took a deep breath. She wrote that Daniel wasn't given away because Mom didn't want him. I felt something tighten in my chest. Then why? Because Grandma believed Daniel was in danger. I stared at him. Marcus explained that when Mom was 17, Daniel's biological father had disappeared shortly before Daniel was born. Grandma believed the man was involved in a serious financial dispute and was afraid that people looking for him would eventually find Daniel. So she arranged for Daniel to be placed with another family. But there was something Grandma hadn't told Mom. The adoptive family wasn't supposed to move Daniel out of the state. They did anyway. Mom spent years trying to find him. Eventually, she discovered the elderly couple who owned our house had taken Daniel in temporarily. But by then, Daniel had already been legally adopted. Mom was devastated. She secretly followed his life from a distance. That's why she had a photograph of him. That's why she knew where he lived. And that's why she had kept the entire story from Dad. I looked at Marcus. How did you find all this? He looked embarrassed. Because I was trying to find out why Dad wanted the house left to you. So you went searching through his things? Yes. And you found the letter? Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Marcus looked at me. Because I thought Dad was giving you the house because he trusted you more. I didn't know what to say. For years, Marcus had carried resentment toward me. He thought Dad had always favored me. But now I realized he had been looking for proof of something that wasn't true. Then Marcus said something unexpected. I was planning to sell the house. I know. No, you don't. He looked down. I already had a buyer. My heart dropped. What? I contacted a realtor before Dad died. I couldn't believe it. You were going to sell Dad's house while he was still alive? I didn't know he was going to die. That's not the point. I know. He pulled out his phone and showed me an email. A buyer had offered considerably more than the estimated market value. But there was a condition. They wanted access to the blue room before closing. I looked at Marcus. Why? I didn't know. Then Harold suddenly spoke. I do. We both turned toward him. Harold explained that the property had an old foundation structure beneath the blue room. Years ago, the original owners had used it as a private storage space. But the property records were incomplete. The buyer wasn't interested in the house itself. They were interested in what might still be underneath it. Marcus looked horrified. So Dad knew. Apparently. And that's why he wouldn't sell. Harold nodded. Then he opened one final folder. Inside was a recent photograph. It showed Dad standing beside an older man. I recognized the man immediately. Daniel. On the back, Dad had written, "He finally knows the truth. Now my sons must decide what to do with it." I looked at Marcus. For the first time since Dad died, neither of us was thinking about money. We were thinking about the same question. What exactly was hidden beneath that room? That evening, we went back to the house. Marcus unlocked the blue room. The door creaked open. Dust covered everything. Old furniture stood against the walls. But beneath the floorboards, near the back corner, we found a metal hatch. Marcus looked at me. I've never opened this. I lifted the latch. Underneath was a narrow staircase leading into darkness. At the bottom was a small concrete room. There were boxes everywhere. And on the largest box was a name. Daniel Mercer. I opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, photographs, legal documents, and one final envelope addressed to both of us. I opened it carefully. The first line made my entire body go cold. Your mother didn't give Daniel away because she had no choice. I looked at Marcus. There was more. And whatever was written on the next page was going to change everything we thought we knew about our family. I read the first sentence again. Your mother didn't give Daniel away because she had no choice. My hands were shaking. Marcus stood beside me, completely silent. I continued reading. The letter wasn't from Dad. It was from our mother. She had written it years before she died. She explained that when she was 17, she had indeed given birth to Daniel. But she had never abandoned him. The truth was much harder. Daniel's biological father had discovered the pregnancy and wanted nothing to do with either of them. His family offered money to make the situation disappear. Mom refused. But her parents were terrified of the scandal. They arranged for Daniel to be adopted. Mom fought them. She tried to stop it. But she was 17, legally powerless, and eventually lost. For years, she believed Daniel had been taken from her. Then, decades later, she discovered where he was. She found the elderly couple who had raised him. And she began quietly watching from a distance. But she never approached him. Not because she didn't love him. Because she was afraid that appearing suddenly would destroy the life he had built. Then she met Dad. Dad eventually learned everything. Instead of leaving her, he stayed. He told her that Daniel was still her son, regardless of what had happened. And that was why the house mattered. The elderly couple who had raised Daniel had left something important behind. They had written a letter explaining that the house was the one place where Daniel had felt completely safe as a child. They wanted him to have the opportunity to return someday. So Dad promised Mom that if Daniel ever came looking for answers, the house would remain available to him. That was the real reason Dad left it to me. Not because I was his favorite. Not because Marcus was less important. Because Dad trusted me to protect the promise. I looked at Marcus. He was crying. I thought Dad hated me, he whispered. He didn't. I thought he left everything to you because I disappointed him. I shook my head. He didn't. Marcus sat on the old wooden floor. Then he told me the part he had been hiding. The buyer he'd contacted wasn't just interested in the house. They knew about the old storage room. Someone had apparently found references to it in historical property records. Marcus had been offered a large amount of money if he could get access. He hadn't known what was inside. He just saw an opportunity. And he regretted it. We spent the next several weeks going through the documents. Eventually, we found Daniel. He was living quietly in another state. We contacted him. When he came to the house, he stood on the porch for almost 10 minutes without saying anything. Then he walked inside. He touched the old wooden railing. He looked at the kitchen. And finally, he went upstairs. When he entered the blue room, he started crying. Not because of the secrets. Because he remembered it. He had been a child when he lived there. He remembered his adoptive parents bringing him to the house. He remembered hiding toys beneath the floor. He remembered the elderly couple who had cared for him. And suddenly, the entire mystery made sense. The house wasn't valuable because of what was underneath it. It was valuable because it held pieces of a family that had spent decades believing they had lost each other. Daniel didn't want the property. He asked me to keep it. He said the house should remain somewhere the family could return to. Marcus apologized to me. He also contacted the potential buyer and ended the deal. We never sold the house. Today, the three of us still have complicated relationships. Daniel isn't magically my best friend. Marcus and I still argue. And sometimes I still wonder whether I should have told Marcus about Dad's promise sooner. But I've learned something. Dad wasn't choosing between his sons. He was trying to give both of us the chance to understand why he made the decision he did. As for the question I originally came here with, ATA for refusing to give my late father's house to my brother? I don't think I was. But I do wonder if I should have trusted my brother enough to tell him the truth earlier. So now I'm asking you. Was I wrong for keeping Dad's secret from Marcus until everything came out, or was I right to honor my father's final request?